with that, we will quickly move on now to the next session of the day. No conference is complete without a panel discussion, and with all the talks that we've been having, it was about time that we had a discussion on all these topics. We have with us Mr. Debdoot Mukherjee, Vice President AI at Sharechat, Professor Animesh Mukherjee, Associate Professor A.K. Singh Chair at Department of CSE IIT Kharagpur, and Professor Abhijnan Chakraborty, Assistant Professor and PBO Group Faculty Fellow at the Department of CSE at IIT Delhi. The panel will be moderated by Prabhat Kumar Saraswat, Head of Data Science Recommendations at Huawei Technologies India. This is a panel on biases and ethical challenges in AI. Over to you, Prabhat.
Hi, Anvit. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the panel discussion on the topic of biases and ethical challenges in AI. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of VLDE for constituting such a eminent panel and organizing a discussion around this very appropriate and important topic. Now, before introducing the panelists and telling more about them, let me set the context by saying few words on what the topic of discussion is about and why it is relevant in today's world. Now, as we are aware, AI is all around us. From the start of the day, reading news online, to ordering our groceries, to interacting with our friends on social media, things like applying to bank loans once in a while, getting mails regarding credit card offers, ordering food, endlessly consuming short video feeds until you're exhausted and go to sleep. It's like an endless cycle, where we are all surrounded by algorithms. Which are taking decisions on our behalf. As human beings, we often feel comfort in knowing that these algorithms are coming from reputed companies. So we put our trust in them and think that they must be impartial and truly just. But are they? So if we look at, in the recent news, almost 2 weeks back, we saw Facebook's algorithms for ranking of content and ad targeting was brought into the scrutiny of US Congress after one of the former employees testified on how the underlying algorithms prioritize profit and can spread misinformation, hate speech, and cause depolarization within the society and impact children. In fact, something similar was there with Netflix almost around 2 years ago, where they have this concept of artwork personalization, where different users see different posters for TV shows and movies to maximize that they will, watch them. So where people from Afro-American community felt that they are actually being shown posters based on their race, as the personalized posters for Afro-American users were primarily showed to them. And in fact, Netflix had to come on record and categorically say that they do not use any feature called race within their algorithm. There are many more examples from the products that we use in daily lives, like searching for jobs on job portals, consuming news on social media, ordering product on e-commerce, what Professor Animesh was talking about, where underlying an AI might be unfair or have biases and have ethical implications. So among the audience today, along with being users of AI-based products, many of us are developers also of such systems. Many of us are also leaders overlooking the product roadmap. As engineers, we often think that, okay, these issues of ethics and biases, we do not think about them, and thinking it does not apply. We are just creating software and algorithms, what harm it can do. But today, we will try to understand this difficult question, address the so-called elephant in the room, and learn from some of the top researchers in this domain. Also some top industry practitioners who are tackling and solving these difficult questions on day-to-day basis. So today the agenda is we'll dissect this topic of bias and ethics in AI and understand what are the causes that can make AI algorithms partial. What kind of biases and ethical challenges are there? How do we diagnose them? How do we act upon them? What kind of tools and technologies we can use for the same? So having set this context, let me introduce our eminent panelists. Today, I have with me 3 of the top researchers and AI practitioners in India in this domain. So I have with me Professor Animesh Mukherjee. Professor Animesh, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
So Professor Animesh is professor in Department of Computer Science at IIT KGP. In fact, his PhD thesis was very interesting around how human speeches are there, what kind of, how they self-organize, what kind of sounds are within there and how they're organized together. In fact, from his DLPB, we can glimpse on this huge body of work related to multilingual text understanding, understanding hate speeches and biases in recommender systems. In fact, one of his papers recently won the Ted Nelson Best Paper Award at ACM Hypertext. And at KGP, he is also teaching a course on AI and ethics at IIT KGP. So warm welcome, Dr. Animesh.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much.
Then we have with us Professor Abhijnan Chakraborty. Professor Abhijnan, say hi.
Hi everyone. I think I was muted. Yeah.
So Professor Abhijnan, hi, welcome. So he's a professor at Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Delhi. He's also taught at, he's teaching in fact at School of Artificial Intelligence there. And his main research areas around responsible AI, where he's specializing in algorithmic fairness. And he has fair amount of work, published work relating to understanding online social networks, deeply looking into concepts of misinformation on social media. And also he's researching on societal aspects of AI, like AI for social goods, how AI and law are intertwined together. In fact, during his PhD, he was winner of the prestigious Prime Minister's Fellowship for Doctoral Research and Google India PhD Fellowship. It's a very rare achievement. Proud, very happy to have you here. Warm welcome, Dr. Abhijnan.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Prabhat.
And last but not the least, we have Mr. Debdoot Mukherjee. Debdoot, if you can say hi.
Hi everyone, excited to talk to you.
Hi, Debdoot. So he's a VP of AI at Sharechat, where he drives initiatives related to data science pipeline. And Sharechat does not need any introduction. With apps like Sharechat and Moj used by more than 100 million of users across India, which are sharing billions of text, audio, video, photos to each other, almost covering many Indian languages. It's like a massive juggernaut of social media exchange. So it's very good to have a homegrown product which is doing so well. Mr. Debdoot is also the Delhi alumni. In fact, he is a gold medalist and has been passionate researcher since last 12 years, where he worked on leading data science teams at IBM, Myntra, and Hike in field of various domains of information retrieval, fashion, even fashion recommendations. And his main interests are around computer vision, NLP, contextual search, multimodal recommendations. Warm welcome, Mr. Debdoot.
Yeah, thank you.
So let me talk a little about the format of this discussion. Initially, each of the panelists will have brief lightning talk around this topic. And once each of the panelists has spoken about, we'll go into the free-flowing discussion and discuss these topics from context and relevance for India. This is an interactive session, so there is a Q&A section below in the chat. So please feel free to ask questions during the discussion, and we'll collate them and ask our panelists as we go on. So first, I will invite Dr. Animesh to talk about this topic of biases and ethics in AI.
Yeah, okay. So thank you very much. So this is indeed probably a need of the hour. So like I have been working in this area for some time, mostly introduced by Professor Krishna Gummadi from MPI SWS, who is a long friend and colleague. So like I have been working in this area of so to say an interdisciplinary area of so to say platform governance. So and biases and fairness in ML is like a subpart of platform governance. So there are two different aspects of platform governance that I work on. One is the hate speech direction, like where we try to identify harmful speech. We try to identify which communities are targeted. We try to identify whether there are biases in the models detecting hate speech. And then we also try to use language generation models to counter hate speech. So that's one area that I intensely work on. And the other area that I have been working on is what I presented today, like roughly. So specifically looking into fairness aspects in two-sided recommendation platforms where you have the, in fact, a three-sided recommendation platform where you have the marketplace, the customers, and sellers. So and there, like, we try to study various biases that emerge due to unfair choices, like different sensitive attributes and things like that. And then so basically the sub methodology that we use in this particular area is what is called auditing. So this is a large umbrella of research that people do under fairness and biases studies, and this comes under the purview of auditing, and that is mostly what we do in our current studies. Yeah, so that's roughly summarizes my kind of activities in this area. And of course, like, I would be happy to share some of my observations during my research in this entire like platform governance domain, like with this learned audience, like so as the panel proceeds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Animesh. Now I would like to invite Mr. Debdoot to talk briefly about this topic, and what kind of maybe can give some anecdotes on any bias related issues that we are seeing in real life.
Okay, I'll share my slides. I have a few of them just to go over. Just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so as in the introduction itself, Prasad mentioned, like, there's a huge chatter and furor in the media around a certain social media marketplace and their leaked papers. That's a good handbook to understand what kind of issues can arise in products, but sorry to disappoint you, I won't be talking about that today. Instead, what I'll be focusing on is like, what does ethics mean when we build products, and when, like, so to me, it's all about pluralism, right? And how do you build for everyone, right? So that's a central concept. And this is not something new. I mean, like, the concept of pluralism is not such like suddenly endangered because of AIML. It is like, if you look at the root causes of all of these biases, you'd be able to trace them to how we think and how we think of optimizing our goals, right? So for us, for our businesses, for our platforms, and for our users, right? And like, this is not something new, but what has been new is, because all of these optimizations are currently being done by AI models, and like, we all use these data-driven products. Some of these biases which were always there are now at really internet scale, right? And that sort of impacts all of us, and that is the reason why we should discuss this topic much more today than maybe 10 years back. So, like, what I'll try to focus on is like some topic which is very central to us at Sharechat. So our mission statement at Sharechat is about building an AI-powered content marketplace. And at the heart of it, the central question is, how do we build a fair content marketplace? Because we realize that is one of the ways, if we are successful in building fairness into this content marketplace, that is good for all of our users, and ultimately in the long term, good for the business as well. So, like, this topic, interestingly, has gotten to do with the genesis of the Sharechat platform itself. So if you roll back 5 to 7 years, India's internet story, India's internet population was very different from what it is right now, right? It was a population which was largely the English educated part of the society, and all the products which were developed in the West, they were focused on this generation of users because like they were the majority of people who were using the internet, and like their tastes and interests were no different from anyone in the rest of the world. So the products which were built to deliver the needs and wants for users across the world also worked for India. And with data prices dropping, etc., one of the phenomena which started 5-7 years back is like there was a new section of the society which started coming online, right? And as it happened, initially most of the products did not focus on the needs and wants for this set of people, and they were very different because they were coming from a very different socioeconomic background, and hence your taste in content is also defined by who you are and what kind of socioeconomic background you come from. And that really gave birth to Sharechat and this idea that, hey, if this population grows, and which it has grown over the last 5 to 7 years, the internet population has grown from 50 to 100 million users to over 600 million users today. And today, this user base in India forms the majority, right? So like the concept of what happens if you don't sort of pay attention to a nascent population of user base, which may not be the majority class today, but may be the majority 5 years down the line. And that's where a lot of the growth opportunity lies. And the Sharechat story is really sort of a testament to that. And what we started from was, if you look at like social media, and it's still very much today, like the discourse in social media is dominated by English, right? And people who can speak in English, they dominate the discourse. And this was one of the things that we wanted to change very early on, saying that can we give all the languages and all the cultures a space where they can express freely. And this is not just about internet. I mean, if you walk into a party where you have a certain socioeconomic, like probably the bottom socioeconomic background people, they would suddenly stop their discourse when they feel that, oh, some English speaking person has walked into the party, right? And that is how probably some of the biases and have been ingrained into us as a country. And we wanted to change that, and like we came up with a product where you, like as a first step, you select a language, and you like the entire experience and whatever you see is dominated by content from that language only. And that helped people because they realize that this is a space where they can express freely. But then like this is not as simple, right? I mean, like as practitioners and people who create these internet products, like the source of all the debate comes around utility versus fairness, right? By building a product which may not be fully fair, but delivers utility, you give something back to the users today versus what you can do in the long run. So one case in point is that of a multilingual user, right? So many of us, like in India, we are multilingual people. We speak at least 2 languages, and a lot of us speak Hindi. So on our content feed, we probably don't need just one language. We need more than one language. So now that lends itself into like that problem again, right? So the majority language can dominate the discourse. So how do you keep solving this? And to me, this is one of the main questions that we need to calibrate ourselves and really think deeply on where we stand and what are the choices that we want to make.
Right. Mr. Debdoot, I think this is where we have a specific question around this, the India specific context. So we can probably take this.
So like, I'll sort of close and give a space to other panelists. So we can discuss many of these other kinds of fairness subjects, like fairness to all creators is another thing, and we can discuss more around that, fairness to all topics. So essentially, the same same principle of fairness extends to different things. So this is an example where, I think the literature is focused on this topic of gender and racial fairness, which is evident in the data sets. This is one example where if there's a model that is trained on predominantly a certain gender and a certain skin color, the output does not work very well on other kinds of users. So I'll pause here and space to others.
Yes, thanks. Professor Abhijnan, you've had some experience with working with e-commerce companies during your research as well. So if you can also talk a little bit about.
Sure. So let me quickly share my screen and then, is it visible?
Yes.
Yeah. So the key question which we are kind of focusing is that why we need to train ethical AI, right? If you look at the places where AI algorithms are currently being deployed, it's all pervasive. Like it is taking over our public places, marketplaces, workplaces, and even private spaces. Now, specifically, your question was about marketplaces, which not only includes the e-commerce platforms, but also include donation, crowdfunding, matchmaking, even many guilty pleasure websites like OnlyFans, etc. And my research has been focused on mostly on this marketplaces as well as workplaces, like mainly different gig economy platforms like ride-hailing, food delivery, microtask platforms. And the key question is that how can you ensure fairness for different stakeholders in these platforms? Now, the main point which I want to highlight, and this is what is underlying the whole research area of this fair ML or ethical AI, is that since this AI algorithms are touching all aspects of our lives, the key question is that shouldn't it embed the societal values and norms we have? And that's essentially the key highlight of all this research which is going on in this space. Now, of course, someone can say that existing deployments may already be adhering to different norms, right? However, it turns out that there have been multiple use cases which has been highlighted, including some of the use cases which you mentioned, that there are many applications where it is not the case. So, for example, this particular case was highlighted quite widely, that in recidivism risk score assessments, it turns out that African Americans are treated by an algorithm pretty badly compared to Caucasian users. And in fact, the same is true for even healthcare related algorithms, like the algorithm which is used to determine which patient would need additional care, it tends to reflect or replicate the historical neglect towards poorer groups. So it turns out that somehow the algorithm is predicting who is needing additional care depending on who has already spent more money in the past for those patients. So it just replicates the biases against poorer groups. And the same is true for many facial detection algorithms, like it depends on the gender and the color, and the accuracy varies across gender and color. So this is something like all these things are undesirable. But the main challenge in this particular area is that how do we embed the values? Like how do we embed societal norms in AI algorithms, right? So the key steps are, first of all, we need to formally interpret fairness principles, like what are the principles and how do we actually interpret them. Second is that, okay, once you have finalized like which particular fairness principle to pick and how to operationalize, then the question is of synthesis, like how can we design efficient learning mechanisms for different fairness interpretations. And finally, what are the trade-offs? Like Mr. Debdoot also mentioned about the trade-off between equity and fairness, but it also turns out that there are also trade-offs between different ethical principles. So that is also another challenge, that which ethical principle to pick and how do you actually address the trade-offs between different learning objectives. And there are multiple use cases, like even when we try to build a fair classifier, there can be different ethical principles which we can use, and then we can interpret and finally we can implement, right? Like, and there have been multiple research works which are following these steps, and including like our group has been working on this area for quite some time. And this is true not only for classification, but for search ranking, personalized recommendation, clustering, influence maximization, and so on. There are several major challenges which we can discuss probably in more detail as we go along, and these are kind of more true in the Indian context. So first of all, how do you even offer fairness at scale? Like, we tend to talk about different social. Now, in India, there are 550 scheduled tribes in our constitution. Yeah.
Dr. Abhijnan, sorry to interrupt, but actually we have a specific question for you, Dr. Debdoot, around the India specific.
Yes.
So maybe we can cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So I would like to just take a segue from what Professor Abhijnan was talking about, where and this is a question I can put to Professor Animesh, that we see that majorly accepted concepts and definition of algorithmic fairness is basically centered around Western world. The topics which talked about racial inequality, the fairness and Afro-American, and things like equal opportunity, which might not be a priority in countries like ours, like in India, developing countries. So why is basically the research is focused around algorithmic, is focused around these Western concepts?
Yeah, so this is a very important and legitimate point. So so far, the scientific community, if you see, has grown up around the Western researchers, and only there has been like a couple of research papers that have come up which are dominantly India centric. So thinking differently from the Western setup has so far been avoided. So there are pertinent reasons also for that. So since there is an established model, there is an established infrastructure already there, the objective was always, to fit the new data that you have, say from the eastern part of the world, into the infrastructure that has already been built so far that has been built so far in the West. So this idea of reusability is something that actually drove the whole development, and probably was one of the impediment for impediment towards development of in-house tools and techniques and in-house methodologies in the first place. So of late, people have started to feel that, okay, fitting the Indian data into the Western system might not work. So, and there are a plethora of reasons for this. I think already Debdoot was mentioning a few, Abhijnan was also trying to mention a few, there are hundreds of different reasons which make it very, very difficult to fit whatever data you curate from India into the the Western setup. First of all, some of the sensitive attributes themselves are very different. If you compare India with the US. So in US, the fair ML community probably does not even realize what is caste. So, and this is something which is very, very intertwined with the Indian setup and the Indian fairness setup. So also the other point that probably the US is not not well aware of is complete illiteracy. So this is also something and the majority falling under this complete illiteracy. So that is another thing that is very, very important in the Indian context. The third is the variety of languages. So if you look at just Bengal itself. So and this is true for every different part of India. Bengal itself has 300 different dialectal variations. And if you want to have representations like for all these different dialectal variations in your data set or in your fair ML setup, like a completely different infrastructure has to be thought of.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that's very important point, and at this point I'd like to bring Mr. Debdoot in, where he can probably add on to your examples on some real life examples that we are seeing from Sharechat.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Debdoot.
Yeah, I think Animesh did cover a lot of the major points. The language multiplicity of linguistic dialects. This is a problem which is very uniquely Indian, right? Especially in US, I mean, it's one country, one language. China is one country, one language. We we are the first country where you need to build an internet which is multilingual and not just in terms of the major languages, but if you go into dialects, you get into thousands of dialects, right? The other point is about digital divide, right? Where how can
Mr. Debdoot, sorry to interrupt. If you can just speak a bit louder, some of the people cannot hear.
Sure. Yeah. So the other point is about digital divide, right? Which is again very uniquely Indian. People talk about the accessibility subject in the West, which has gotten to do with disability and so on. So there's a lot of fairness literature around that topic. But digital divide and the way to use technology, what kind of user interface works for our audience, right? Which is who are coming online for the first time. You need a specific treatment for those kinds of biases, right? Around accessibility of interfaces with digital divide taken into account. The other point is even in terms of we talked about caste and so on, but even economic disparity in the country is huge, right? So one of the papers was talking about that if you buy, if you're riding a motorcycle in Bombay, you're not a big person, but if you're riding the same motorcycle in a village, you're probably the richest in the village.
Right.
So in terms of social norms, in terms of the multiplicity of linguistic and caste kind of systems, in terms of the disparity of socioeconomic spread that we have in the country, as well as languages, right? So India is all about diversity along all of these dimensions. So it's a much more complex problem than a US researcher who's focused on a certain demographic can ever imagine.
Yeah, that's right. Professor Abhijnan, you want to add?
Yeah, I think many of the things which have been already covered. A few more things is, so for example, again, talking about economy, right? So our economy has been mostly unstructured economy, and a lot of labor forces are not under any proper legal safeguards. And as we are having all this different delivery, I mean, a lot of companies which are doing these delivery services, including e-commerce deliveries from food delivery, etc. So many of the workers here were working almost full time, but not getting any employment benefits, right? So I think so we need to think about how to offer a fair income to these users. And there have been some works which are going on, but again, it is a complex subject, especially in the Indian context, that it's not very clear what is exactly the minimum wage in different cities, how it is even enforced properly, whether it is at all enforced or not. So all these things somehow make the whole system a bit more challenging, and the research is very uniquely focused in the Indian context, compared to the context in the US or other Western countries.
Got it. I think now we can talk about some more practical solutions, how we can counteract this bias and probably address it better. If Mr. Debdoot can take an example of how we are tackling this in Sharechat, And for example, one of the questions that we are seeing in panel is, from one of the audience is that in a lot of complex algorithms, bias and unwanted features learned is not visible to the developer if it's too late. Uh, for example, skin colors, although it's not an explicit feature, like Professor Animesh was saying, the audit of sensitive features we can do, but sometimes those things are also captured by our deep learning models. So how do, as a machine learning engineer, I can avoid such things before the complaints start coming in from the outside world?
Yeah, so I'll break my answer into like 2-3 different roles, right? So the first part about being an ML engineer is that you need product thinking as a competency, and in some cases you have product managers baked into ML teams, right? So in a lot of these questions are important questions for a product manager, and I'll give 2-3 important questions for the product thinking part. So first is like you need to define what is a like acceptance criteria with a view on what is a minimum sense of accountability that you have for different cohorts in your user base, right? And like that is where like some of that utility versus fairness trade-off that I was talking about comes in. But like if something is harmful, right? So let's say a feature is great for 80% of the users, or let's say 95% of the users. But if for 5% of users, it is actually causing psychological harm or like some kind of a physical harm in the physical world, you need to be cognizant of that, right? So that is something that we need to think about for every product. When you conceive an ML product, how do you think about a minimum sense of accountability, right? And so that needs to be defined. Second, I think like when you're conceiving the product, you need to think about what Abhijnan was mentioning about sensitive features or protected attributes, right? And which then can be systematically sort of studied when you're building a fair classifier. But first, the definition of what are the attributes that need to be looked at, right, is I guess the harder problem than building the fair classifier. So that is again a product question. The third question is around like many of these products have a virtuous cycle inbuilt, right? So they have these self-fulfilling prophecies which become stronger and stronger over time. So as like when you're creating or conceiving the product, can you realize what is the virtuous cycle for your product going to be? And what are those self-fulfilling prophecies which you need to be guarding against?
Right.
Fourth point is around like short-term versus long-term thinking, right? I mean, like maybe you are launching something with a view on short-term growth, but can you sort of, are you alienating a long-term opportunity or vice versa, right? Can you focus on a long-term problem which will probably not give you sort of gains immediately, but if you bake in fairness into the product, you'll have long-term gains. So these are all the product questions, but from a technologist point of view, I think like we spoke about building an algorithmic fairness, but what is also very important is building an audit pipeline. Once you've figured out what are those protected attributes, on a daily basis, when your models are getting retrained, can you, as part of your overall ML deployment workflow, build in these audit checks, which will raise alarms on like if the user behavior is getting compromised for a certain cohort of users, right? And adequate checks on these protected attributes.
Okay.
So these are some of the things that from like conceiving an ML product and day-to-day basis maintenance of ML products, we need to be cognizant of.
Got it. Yeah, so we have a lot of ML engineers and leaders in our audience. So I would like to just quickly ask Professor Animesh and Professor Abhijnan, if there's some sort of a code of ethics or a standardized list that we can follow. Is there some work going on to define these ethics? And it's also one of the questions which is asked, that what is it ethic essentially?
Okay, so like as far as like a definition of ethics goes, it is very subjective. And like it builds around, the moral principles and the moral thoughts of a particular society. And now, like coming up into the fair ML literature, what one can look into. So there are like a few prongs that one can concentrate on. One is like there is a field of research or a subfield of research that is going on under fairness, which is called building of model cards. So you want to have model cards for all the model designs that you actually build. So this model card includes information like, okay, I had this data distribution, I had this many numbers of positive instances, this many number of positive negative instances, say if it is a simple classification problem. And this there are these set of assumptions that I have made. So if you are trying to use a new data set which violates these assumptions, then you should not be probably using this model. And these are some of the things that actually, and there are like papers written around how to design good model cards. So in fact, Timnit Gebru and her colleagues have some very good work in this space. So this is one way to do it. And the other way is what has recently become very popular, with some papers coming up, in fact, this year, which is called permissioned audit. So what people do is like industries like come up and join hands with academics, and like they give their own data, and the academics set up like certain like audit checks. Like it starts from, say, some very simple audit checks to some very complex audit checks, and you try to see like whether all the predictions that your model is making in the whole pipeline actually passes these audit checks. So it's like check 1, check 2, check 3, and things. So it's kind of check boxing things. So, and Christo Wilson and his group has a very nice paper around this in this year's FACT. So I think these are some of the things that could be nice references to developers and ML engineers.
Right. Yeah, thanks for this. I think it's a very practical suggestion of using the model cards and these fact checks that we can do, and probably it will lead to more transparent model generation. I have to just end up. I have one question from the audience, one final question, that what issues we see when we have differential privacy, and when we want to train something, is the training need to be aware of differential privacy, or it needs to be completely oblivious to it? So, Professor Abhijnan, you want to take a dig at this?
So I frankly don't have much background on privacy, so I won't be able to comment exactly on this. But one thing is that I just want to add one small point to what Professor Animesh answered in the last question. So I normally work with legal researchers, like lawyers and legal practitioners. So one thing they mention is that like ethical guidelines, many companies are adopting, and many researchers are also kind of proposing about. One thing the legal practitioners say that oftentimes many of these issues can be handled by existing law itself. So if your model or if your machine learning algorithm adheres to the current law of the land, then many of the things may already be taken care of. So for example, discrimination itself, like there are anti-discrimination laws almost in every country. So if you adhere to that, then automatically like you are sort of like, whether you are ethical or not, you are legal. So so there is always this ethics versus law trade-off, but I just wanted to add that point. But about differential privacy, I think I'll just pass that question, because I'm not qualified enough to answer.
Yeah, actually, so we are also just running out of time, so I would I think I'll ask the person asking question can directly reach out to Professor Animesh or Mr. Debdoot for this. So I think it's a very good point, good discussion that we had, which stirs this conversation on, and it's a much larger discussion that which needs to go on, where all the stakeholders from, as Mr. Debdoot said, from product designers and from leaders and even somebody from the legal department, and which can actually come and build these transparent systems and actually lead to very fair and equitable AI. So I would like to thank all three of you for such enriching discussion on this topic. Thanks a lot. So I think everyone can give a
thanks a lot, Prabhat.
big
Thank you very
hand
much for
wherever.
inviting me.
Yeah, thanks, Professor Abhijnan. Thanks, Professor Animesh, and thanks, Mr. Debdoot, for such an enriching discussion. So everyone, I think we are at virtually, so we can all just give a big hands to this lovely panel discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Anvit, Fatima.
Thank you so much. Talking about virtual applause, ladies and gentlemen, let the virtual applause continue for all the panelists and, of course, our moderator, Mr. Prabhat Kumar, for doing such a wonderful job. It truly was an enriching panel discussion. With that gratitude being expressed, ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on to our next session.